You know, when you look at a map of the world, you see these solid, neatly defined lines, right, separating all the countries.
Right, yeah.
It gives you this sense of, I don't know, comfort. You think, okay, this is how the world is divided. These are the borders. These are the teams.
Right. It's clean. It's very binary. We like to think those geopolitical lines are just, fixed realities that explain how the world actually works.
But what if those lines are actually an illusion? Like, what if someone told you that the real map of the world has absolutely nothing to do with those borders?
Mm-hmm.
And that the real global war has been playing out entirely invisible to us for over a century.
I mean, it completely upends how you process your daily news feed.
Yeah.
Because suddenly, the actors you thought were enemies might actually be tools, and, the allies you trusted might be the ones holding the leash.
And look, we're diving into Susan Kokinda's framework today, which she outlined in a recent PBD podcast interview representing Promethean action. And I need to say right up front, she touches the absolute third rail of politics here.
Oh, absolutely.
Left-right, highly controversial international history. So explicitly, to you listening right now, we aren't here to endorse this worldview or, pick sides.
Right. We're putting on our hazmat suits today.
Exactly. Just putting on the hazmat suits to take apart the machinery of her argument and see how it ticks. We want to impartially report and map out her architecture so you can understand the source material for yourself.
Because it is a very different blueprint of history.
Yeah.
And it's a dense one.
Yeah, and the central premise of that blueprint is just the ultimate hook. She argues that the primary global conflict is not capitalism versus communism.
Right.
It's not the West versus the Middle East. It is this hidden, centuries-old battle between what she calls the American system and the British imperial system.
Let's establish what those terms actually mean in this framework, because basically everything else, the assassinations, the foreign policy, the economics, it all flows directly from this definition.
So what's the American system?
Well, historically, the American system was championed by figures like Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln, and William McKinley.
Okay.
And in this view, it's an economic model entirely based on human creativity. It values, physical production, scientific progress, and sovereign nations actually working together for mutual development.
Okay, let's unpack this. If the American system is like a gardener.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. A gardener whose wealth comes from physically growing a vibrant, healthy crop, creating actual value in the physical world, then the British imperial system is essentially a casino.
Right.
A casino that produces absolutely nothing physical, but extracts wealth by basically just rigging the rules of the game.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. The casino doesn't build, it just extracts wealth by gatekeeping. Kokinda describes this British system, historically centered around the globalist financier elite and the City of London, as a model based on keeping nations backward, manipulating money, and just extracting resources.
But why are these two systems so, utterly incompatible? I mean, why can't gardeners and the casino owners just coexist?
What's fascinating here is why it matters on a philosophical level. It comes down to a clash over the image of man.
The image of man.
Yeah. Kokinda points out that British liberal philosophers like John Locke and David Hume, they essentially argued that humans are blank slates who only know the world through their base senses.
Right, right. We seek pleasure, we avoid pain.
Exactly. The ultimate empiricist view. And if we are just animals driven by our senses, we're easily manipulated consumers.
You can manage us.
You can manage us perfectly. But the American system operates on the idea that humans are inherently creative beings, made in the image of a creator.
So our nature is to invent.
Right, to invent and build. Therefore, a nation's economy shouldn't be measured by, financial machinations in a banking center, but by how much it maximizes that human creative spark.
And according to this worldview, by the late 19th century, this American system of physical production was just becoming the absolute wonder of the world.
Oh, yeah. Other nations weren't just admiring it, they were literally copying it.
And that is where the conflict turns physical, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look at Count Witt in Russia during that era. He was heavily influenced by the Americanist system.
Oh.
He didn't just want Russia to be this vast, disconnected agrarian landscape from which London could just extract cheap wheat. He literally used state-backed financing to build the Trans-Siberian Railway.
Wow. Which fundamentally changes the geography of power.
Entirely. By physically uniting the country with rail, he was internalizing trade and making Russia immune to British naval blockades.
Right.
Japan did something similar during the Meiji Restoration. Rapid state-backed physical industrialization. Germany was doing it too.
So if you are running that global casino,
Yeah.
right? And suddenly all these sovereign nations are building their own infrastructure and trading directly with each other.
Your extraction model is done.
Yeah, you are facing an existential threat. You're about to be irrelevant.
Precisely. If sovereign nations become self-sufficient, the empire starves.
So how does the empire strike back? I mean, you can't just uninvent the railroad.
No, you can't.
According to Kokinda, they start flipping the board. She claims that the British imperial system actively fostered an environment of radical anarchism, specifically to assassinate American system presidents.
Right.
We're talking about Abraham Lincoln, James A. Garfield, and William McKinley.
The mechanism here is brutal, but, well, effective. If you can't defeat the economic model on paper, you literally kill the executives who are implementing it before the sovereign model can permanently lock in globally.
That's incredibly dark. And she suggests it worked, right?
Yeah, she does.
Following those assassinations at the turn of the 20th century, the United States was essentially co-opted. Kokinda uses this very evocative phrase. She says, we became the dumb giant.
The muscle.
Exactly. So you're saying the entire 20th century superpower narrative, the massive military buildup, all the global interventions, was essentially the U.S. acting as a giant bouncer for a British casino.
That is exactly what she is asserting. For most of the 20th century, the massive industrial and military power of the U.S. was used to enforce the British rules-based order globally. And she notes a very telling recent admission to back this up.
What's that?
The UK House of Lords and their premier think tank, Chatham House, published reports recently where they essentially admitted that their global system only functioned because the United States acted as the enforcer.
Right. They don't need a huge military if we do it for them.
Exactly. They don't need to pay for it if the dumb giant is doing the heavy lifting.
Okay, wait. I have to push back here on behalf of anyone listening. The British.
I know.
When you turn on the news today, the media points the finger at China, Russia, or the Middle East as our global adversaries. Why is she pointing the finger at our oldest and dearest ally? That feels like a massive leap.
It absolutely sounds counterintuitive today, but you have to view it through the lens of the great game.
The great game.
Yeah, this was the 19th century imperial strategy of keeping nations perpetually pitted against each other. The goal of the empire isn't to conquer a country directly.
It's just to cause chaos.
Basically.
Yeah.
The goal is to ensure the global financiers stay on top while everyone else bleeds. If you keep the world fractured, you maintain control of the resources.
Okay, so if the U.S. is acting as the bouncer, where was that muscle primarily deployed? Let's look at the Middle East, because this is where the mechanism of this great game becomes incredibly clear.
Very clear.
Kokinda argues that modern political binaries, like the left versus the right or the West versus Islam, she calls them shadows on the wall.
Yes, she's explicitly referencing Plato's cave there.
Right.
If you're reacting to the shadows projected in front of you, you aren't looking behind you to see who is actually holding the flashlight and making the puppet stance.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When it comes to the Middle East, her claim is incredibly provocative. She asserts that British intelligence actually created radical political Islam. We're talking about historical figures like Lord Cromer in Egypt, T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, and even the father of the infamous spy Kim Philby. Kokinda says the Muslim Brotherhood and Wahhabism were fostered by the British as tools.
And we have to ask why.
Yeah.
I mean, why would the British Empire, which was fundamentally Western, deliberately want to fund and organize radical Islamic factions?
Yeah, that seems entirely counterproductive if you're trying to maintain order.
Unless order isn't the goal.
Oh.
Exactly. The mechanism here is destabilization. The empire-funded fringe religious sects specifically to undermine popular secular nationalist leaders who wanted to control their own physical resources.
Okay, give me an example.
She uses the example of Mossadegh in Iran in the 1950s. Mossadegh wanted to nationalize his country's oil for the benefit of his own people.
Because at the time, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which is now BP, right?
Yes, BP.
They controlled the physical asset while Britain collected the financial cream.
Right. So to stop Mossadegh, you don't just send in an army. You foster internal radicalism. You create a fractured cockpit for war so the nation can never unify.
And the resources can just continue to be extracted cheaply while the locals fight each other.
Exactly.
It's divide and conquer, but engineered on a religious level. And her source material suggests Donald Trump actually recognized this specific game and judo flipped it.
Yeah, the judo flip.
Think about his first foreign trip as president. It wasn't to London, it wasn't to a traditional European ally, it was to Saudi Arabia.
Which confused a lot of traditional foreign policy experts at the time.
Totally. But according to Kokinda, he went there to lay down the law in a very specific way. He essentially said, stop funding these radical destabilizing tools, and in exchange, the U.S. will treat you as a sovereign nation, not a pawn on an imperial chessboard.
Right.
This wasn't an imperial threat, it was a sovereign negotiation. And Kokinda argues this direct shift is what actually paved the way for the Abraham Accords.
Because when you stop reacting to the shadows on the wall, the manufactured religious and political binaries, you can actually sit down and negotiate physical development.
Yeah.
And this framework completely changes how you view other global powers, too. Take China.
Oh, this is a fascinating part of her argument. From the outside, China is relentlessly portrayed as this unstoppable juggernaut that is just going to overtake the world.
Right. But Kokinda points to a glaring physical vulnerability. Their population is collapsing. They have a 1.01 birth rate.
And why does that matter in the context of the American system versus the imperial system?
Because of the image of man we talked about earlier.
Right, the blank slate versus the creator.
China operates a highly stratified, top-down society with a rigid social credit system. It is the ultimate empiricist management system.
Managing the animal.
Exactly. But by policing people's minds and behavior so rigidly, they fundamentally stifle the exact human creativity that the American system relies on.
You can't have it both ways.
No, you cannot program a population to be compliant factory workers and then suddenly expect them to be brilliantly innovative when you need to grow your economy. Their model is physically eating itself.
Which is a perfect pivot, actually, because this philosophical battle over sovereignty isn't just happening in foreign capitals. It directly impacts you listening right now. Your wallet, your gas tank, your local grocery store.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the battle of physical reality versus financial machinations.
Let's look at the price of gas, because this affects everyone. Kokinda talks about the terror premium on oil.
Right. Brent crude pricing is set in London.
And here's the key mechanism. The pricing has absolutely nothing to do with the physical delivery of a barrel of oil.
So it's just numbers on a screen?
It's pure financial speculation based on perceived geopolitical risk. Yet that speculation in London adds about 20% to the cost of gas for a consumer filling up their car in the United States.
Wow.
It's a hidden tax extracted by a financial system that didn't pump the oil, didn't refine the oil, and didn't transport the oil.
The casino strikes again.
Exactly.
And she tells this incredible story about Lloyd's of London to illustrate how this financial monopoly was challenged.
Yeah.
Lloyd's has enjoyed a 300-year monopoly on shipping insurance. Historically, when there's a conflict in the Middle East, they don't cancel insurance. They just jack up the premiums and make a massive fortune off the risk.
But Kokinda notes a recent moment where they changed tactics. To essentially call Trump's bluff and force his hand regarding Iran, Lloyd's actually canceled insurance in conflict zones.
So wait, how does insurance actually dictate geopolitics? Like, if I'm a massive oil tanker, can I just sail anyway?
You literally cannot. The mechanism of global shipping requires underwriting.
Right.
If a ship causes an environmental disaster or is sunk, the liabilities are in the billions. Legally and financially, if London refuses to underwrite the risk, the physical ships stop moving.
Jeez.
It was a massive flex of financial power to halt physical reality.
But Trump's response bypassed their financial gatekeeping entirely by using sovereign governmental power. According to Kokinda, he used the Defense Production Act, specifically citing the April 20th executive orders.
Right.
He used U.S. government financing to say the U.S. taxpayer will underwrite the risk. He backed American energy production directly, ensuring the physical ships could move, completely breaking the London insurance monopoly's leverage.
And he applied that exact same physical logic to the blockade of Iran.
How so?
Well, when the U.S. wanted to pressure Iran, it wasn't just diplomatic posturing or relying on banking sanctions. Kokinda points out the physical mechanics of the oil industry.
Okay.
By around May 2nd of that year, Iran's physical oil storage facilities were projected to be completely full.
And why does that matter?
Because if you can't sell the oil due to the blockade and you literally have nowhere left to store it, physical reality dictates you have to shut down the oil wells.
Oh.
And capping an oil well isn't like flipping a light switch. Once you shut them down, the underground pressure changes. They are incredibly difficult, time-consuming, and expensive to restart.
So he cornered them.
He had them cornered in the physical world, not
Yep.
just on a ledger.
I want you to think about your own life for a second listening to this. Think about the supply chain vulnerabilities we've all experienced recently.
Oh.
Kokinda mentions that if the U.S. grid takes a hit and needs a large electrical transformer, it takes 2 years to get one shipped from South Korea.
2 years. Just think about that.
If our grid goes down, all the financial wealth, all the stock market gains, all the apps on our phones, they mean absolutely nothing. We are physically paralyzed.
Right.
Why? Because we allowed the casino operators to convince us to offshore our physical manufacturing to chase cheaper financial returns. Shifting from financial machinations to physical reality isn't just an abstract economic theory, it's vital for national survival.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the realization is stark. We've been conditioned to revere the invisible hand of the free market.
Right.
But Kokinda argues that sometimes that invisible hand has just been picking the pockets of sovereign nations to feed the City of London.
Yeah.
True national security doesn't come from manipulating a currency or trading derivatives. It requires a robust physical industrial base that can actually produce what your citizens need to survive.
Okay, so we've covered a massive amount of historical and economic ground. Let's pull back and look at where Kokinda actually gets this worldview.
Yes, we need to do this.
Because her background and the mentor who shaped her methodology is highly controversial, and we have to address that.
I do. Her framework is deeply influenced by the late Lyndon LaRouche, and we have to be upfront about his history.
Definitely.
LaRouche is a fascinating, deeply polarizing figure. Over his life, he started as a socialist worker, shifted to the far right, and faced federal indictments for mail fraud and tax evasion.
And he made some wildly provocative claims, right?
Absolutely massive claims. He claimed that the Queen of England ran international drug laundering through offshore black boxes in places like the Cayman Islands.
Wow.
He also claimed, and Kokinda supports this by citing a recent book by historian Richard Poe, that the British literally created communism as a synthetic ideology to weaken their geopolitical rivals, like Russia.
I mean, those are paradigm-shifting claims. They sound like the ultimate conspiracy theories to a modern ear.
They do.
But what Kokinda emphasizes isn't necessarily asking you to adopt every single headline-grabbing theory LaRouche ever had. It's the methodology she took from him.
Right. An absolute uncompromising insistence on reading primary sources.
Exactly. That is the core takeaway. Don't rely on a secondary media narrative. Don't let a cable news anchor summarize the world for you.
It's about looking at the raw data.
So what does this all mean for you navigating today's intense media landscape? If the media really is just casting shadows on the wall, how can you ensure you are looking at the actual light? Kokinda's advice is incredibly practical and completely devoid of partisan spin. She says, stop relying on your social media feed.
Right.
If you want to know what a presidential administration is actually doing, go read the National Security Strategy document yourself. Read the actual text of the executive orders. Watch the unedited cabinet meetings.
Just look at the source.
She argues that if you look at the primary sources, bypassing the pundits, you will see a coherence and a singularity of purpose that the media completely ignores.
And that gets to the absolute heart of what she believes makes a society resilient. Kokinda asserts that a healthy republic requires citizens with the courage of their convictions.
People who can think independently.
Independently, critically, and aren't afraid of complex primary data. She warns that the modern social enforcement we see today, where people are terrified to express a dissenting thought or question the consensus.
Yeah, the cancel culture stuff.
Right, it acts like a soft version of China's social credit system. And if that cultural self-censorship takes root, it will completely cripple the creative engine of our society.
Wow. Let's summarize the journey we've just been on. We've looked at an alternative historical lens where the ultimate battle isn't over lines drawn on a map or even traditional political ideologies.
Oh.
It's a fundamental battle over the image of man. It asks the ultimate question: should a nation's economy serve human creativity and physical progress, acting as a builder?
Right.
Or should it serve a hidden financial elite through perpetual manipulation and extraction, acting as a casino?
It completely reframes history. It changes it from a series of random, chaotic events into a deliberate, ongoing struggle over human potential.
And I want to remind you that whether you agree with Kokinda's sweeping historical conclusions or not, her challenge is incredibly relevant today.
Very true.
Bypassing the shadows on the wall and seeking out primary sources is arguably the most powerful tool you have for navigating our age of intense information overload.
This raises a really important question, though. If we connect this to the bigger picture,
What's that?
if the imperial system relies on keeping the masses distracted by those shadows on the wall, does the rise of decentralized information, like independent deep dives, open source data, and raw, unedited interviews,
Yeah.
does that mean the end of the great game? Or are we simply using all this new technology to build a much more advanced high-definition cave for ourselves?
Wow. Now that is a thought to chew on. Next time you look at a map of the world, just ask yourself, are you looking at the real borders or just the ones they painted for you to see? Keep digging deep, question the shadows, and we'll catch you on the next one.